That would be yes. And we are live. Yes, sir.
All right, welcome to the Public Works Committee meeting November the 2nd here at 2 o'clock. Present, we have Mayor Jeffrey Sarcone, Commissioners Danny Kerr and Pat Fields, staff Amy Rattler, Daryl Smith, Cindy Bowen, Steve Insco, the Chief, Alan Thornton, City Manager. And the guests, we have Gary Jackson, Doodle Ward, Charles Archer, Emily Dar, Donna Perkins from Ledger, Thomas Blaine, Emily Smith. I'll leave with anybody else.
It's Steve Bosco.
We just don't want to insult Steve. Steve, oh, I'm sorry. I got your name here, Steve. I just can't read. That's right. Get it up. Anyone? All right, we've got several things to discuss. Started first with the Elmwood Cemetery. So I'm going to take it over to you.
Little preface. Hey, Emily, can you see us? Can you hear us? All right, you guys are first on the agenda. It's the Elmwood Cemetery Stormwater. I'm not even going to call it a project. This one we'll call it a study because that's kind of where we're at. It's, something that the city has been looking at with the assistance of Breeze and Nichols now for the past several months. And they have put together some information after looking at it extensively, coming up with several different potential options. And I think that we have landed on one at this point. So, Emily, if you'd like to present your findings to the group, we would greatly appreciate it.
Okay, Alan, this is Charles. I'm gonna kick us off here, and let me try to share my screen with you all.
There you go. Charles, everybody, just for your information, also has got a printout of all the
Okay.
slides.
Okay, but make sure you're all seeing the slideshow where you are. Should be the very first slide.
We're on the first page, the cover page.
Okay, great. All right.
Yep.
Okay, good. Thank you all. Again, we appreciate the opportunity to be with you all this afternoon and also the opportunity to work with you on this project. It is a really interesting project. And as was mentioned by Mr. Thornton, we've been looking at it now for several months. And I want to give you some background on this and a recommendation as well. So if I can, just as kind of a reminder, you know, what the city is experiencing at Elmwood Cemetery is there are sinkholes that are beginning to occur across the cemetery. And you can see these photos here on the slide. The one on the left and the one on the center shows the sinkholes. The center photo, you can see kind of out in the distance, the back part of the photo, the traffic cones kind of mark where these, for safety reasons, mark where these sinkholes are occurring in the cemetery. And then the photo on the right is where the storm drainage pipe from this drainage system through the cemetery empties into an adjacent creek. You know, what we have discovered is, and you can see an aerial overview, this area that's this orangish colored line is clay pipe. It's very old and it's beginning to fail. That's what's causing the sinkholes. It's just beginning to collapse due to age. And so pipe is collapsing, so it's causing the surface water to just kind of drain down through the ground into the open pipe and, you know, creating these sinkholes. And if not addressed, those sinkholes don't do anything but multiply and get larger and potentially begin to encroach on some of the adjacent grave sites. On the upper end here, which is really the lower end of the pipe, you can see it's gray colored. It's concrete pipe here. And we believe this pipe is damaged as well. we were out there one afternoon looking at it. Water was running through from the recent rain, but it was not coming out of the pipe. It was coming under the pipe. So what we're recommending is this whole stretch of pipe be replaced. Just looking back through some of the historical information about the cemetery, as you all know, it's a very old cemetery. And it appears that this pipe originally was put in what was designated as a 6-foot wide walkway. So the challenge now that the cemetery is basically full, at least in this section, it's really difficult to get in there and do any repairs without potentially disturbing or damaging adjacent grave sites. And so you can't take conventional size equipment in there like a backhoe. If this were just an open field and we needed to replace pipe or lay pipe, it would be really easy. It's the grave sites that make this project a little bit of a challenge, and it's certainly some risk associated with that. And so that's kind of the situation. You can see here on this portion of the photo, this is kind of an open ditch section that goes into a head wall and collecting the water from the adjacent neighborhood and carrying it through the cemetery, through the creek that runs down here. And so Emily is going to explain our alternatives analysis, and she'll go over the numbers, just a little bit of background information, additional background information. We talked with the North Carolina Division of Archives, their Historical Cemeteries Division, and right now the cemetery is not regulated by the commission. However, it is on a list to be considered added as a National Historic Register site, but it's not on the list now. But they did say that if the city uses any federal funds on this grant funds on this project, it may trigger having to get permits and approvals from the state from that perspective, in addition to any required environmental permits that may be necessary as well. So you all need to keep that in mind as you think about how to fund this project. And the key factor for this is, as I said earlier, if this was just an open field, it'd be a pretty easy solution to it. It's the risk associated with trying not to damage the grave sites that are adjacent to this pipe. And we'll talk more about the risk and the options as we go through this. And the final comment I have before turning it over to Emily to talk about the alternatives is that the numbers that you'll see presented by Emily, they are in today's dollars. Just keep in mind, it's a volatile economy right now with supply chain issues, labor shortages, et cetera. So when the city gets ready to work on this project, if and when it becomes a project, keep in mind that pricing may change. And it's kind of hard to predict what it's going to be. So we're using today's dollars based upon the estimates that we'll be showing you in just a moment. So with that, let me turn it over to Emily, and she'll run through the alternatives, and then we'll be happy to take your questions at the end.
Thank you, Charles. Okay, so as Charles mentioned, we looked at several different alternatives to address the issues going on in the cemetery. This table here is just a real high level of what those alternatives are, and then we're going to dig a little bit deeper into each one. So the first alternative we looked at was a partial reroute within the cemetery, and that's to pull that existing, that first portion of pipe where kind of the largest sinkholes have been shown, reroute that pipe to the existing roadbed within the cemetery. This project involves some new inlets, which are shown in the light blue and light pink color to catch additional flow from the cemetery drainage. And for all of these alternatives, as we go through, we looked at slip lining as well as trenched repair. And so just a brief overview, and I've got a little video later on that'll just describe slip lining a little bit better. But basically what slip lining in it is pulling one pipe through the existing pipe to reline and ultimately use that slip line pipe in place of the existing. And then trench repair is kind of your traditional dig up, remove and replace type of repair. And so each alternative looked at these, and we'll have the numbers towards the end for the different risk associated with slip lining versus trench repair for each alternative. So Charles, if you want to go to the next. So alternative 2 is repairing and replacing the existing alignment. So as the pipe currently falls within the cemetery, this would involve the slip lining or trench repair of the full extent of the pipe. We would replace the 7 inlets that are currently out there. For those of you who've been out to the cemetery, you know the inlets located kind of in the center of the alignment. The road's kind of beat up and kind of starting to fall apart a little bit there. So while we're in there doing work, go ahead and replace those inlets. The next alternative that we looked at was a complete reroute of flow outside of the cemetery. This alternative addresses the situation of having, flow through the cemetery, although you now have to deal with a lot more utility coordinations along your right of way. It also doesn't change the grading within the cemetery, so you'll still have some flow that naturally goes to the spot where the existing pipeline is, because that's the low spot of your area. So you'll see that we still have a couple inlets proposed in those areas to pull out that flow that can't be rerouted from the street. So this alternative looks at slip lining a small portion of the existing pipe, the installation of 8 new inlets, and basically filling the pipe that would be abandoned with concrete so that, flow doesn't continue to go in that pipe and cause problems. And then the last alternative that we show is just, what it would look like for the trenching. And so this alternative is the same as alternative 2, with the exception of the method to which it would be replaced. And so, as I mentioned before, trenching would be digging up the existing pipe and replacing it. Now, one thing to consider with this is the lateral constraints within the cemetery. And as Charles mentioned, the existing pipe was only placed within a 6-foot walkway, so to speak. And so very small equipment would need to be used, if any equipment, to be able to access this alignment without disturbing the graves. So that kind of brings us to how we analyze the different alternatives. First and foremost, we considered the risk to the graves. We know this is a very sensitive subject, especially for people who have family members within the cemetery. And then we considered the cost. And so given those 2 factors, we looked at the different grave sites and the proximity to the replacement. And you can see that number. We've quantified the number of graves within 5 feet on either side and within 10 feet either side of the proposed alignment. And so those are quantified in the second and third columns of this table. And then at the end of the table, you can see the cost estimates for those. And so from a quick comparison, alternative 2 was the cheapest and the least risky. So the fact that those line up is a good thing. And so moving forward with the project, we would recommend alternative 2, which, as a reminder, that was the replacement of the existing alignment with a slip line alternative. And so I think the next slide, we show a little video of what that slip lining is. So Charles, if you want to hit that guy, it's a short video. And so the contractor will basically set up this system. He'll pull this HDPE pipe through the existing pipe. that what it's going through right now sets the diameter of the pipe to be just smaller than the existing pipe so that it fits through the existing system. And here you can see this would be the existing system within the cemetery. Contractor trims it off and then it expands and coats the inner wall. And that HDPE pipe that we would pull through would be about an inch thick. So it's not a thin, flimsy coating. And it's estimated to have a lifespan for stormwater for 300 to 500 years. So it's a long-term solution to replace this clay pipe that's there right now. So this table breaks down what that cost is. The majority of the cost for this project is material cost and the cost to do the slip lining. There is a small design cost, which will be negotiated if this project moves forward, but it should be a pretty simple design, pretty much just a couple design plan sheets for the contractor to build from. There is a good bit for construction oversight, given the sensitive nature of this project. It's important to have someone on site in case the contractor runs into a situation, and that cost kind of brings up the mortician cost. That's just a retainer in case they're called. We hope that they would never need to be called, but you want to have a plan in place in case something were to happen. The additional cost, there's a small cost for survey and the utility location, which will go into the plan development, and then a small cost for environmental permitting. And we've included a contingency here at the bottom to give y'all an upper end of range for your planning purposes. As Charles mentioned, the construction market right now is very volatile. Everyone's super busy and they don't need the work. And so we're seeing a lot of prices come in higher than anticipated. And so the hope is that this 30% contingency will kind of help better predict some of the higher end prices that we're seeing. And then the low range doesn't include a contingency. So that kind of gives you your range to work for as you start trying to plan this project hopefully into your next fiscal year or two. So with that, I think that's pretty much all we had. So if you have any questions, we're happy to answer those.
Any questions?
Ellie, can you please explain for us, and it may be that I'm the only one that missed this, so your description of inserting the slip lining and running it through, how that works with existing pipe, even if it's damaged, but what if the pipe is completely collapsed, so it has to be removed? What happens in those sections?
From my understanding, the slip lining contractor will set up a base, kind of an insertion point, so to speak, and then he'll have another staging area downstream, and he'll pull that pipe through. And he has said that even if it's collapsed completely, he's still able to pull the pipe and basically just move those pieces out of the way. So it would reform, from either end of the pipe that it's going through. It may just not go through, broken clay pipe in those instances. Does that make sense? So it'll use either end of the pipe that's in place to kind of fill the void of the pipe that's failed.
Right.
And they'll just kind of set up.
What the video showed is that the pipe goes through and then it expands and it's kind of contained by the existing pipe. So I guess I'm just wondering, how does it retain the same diameter if it doesn't have any type of wall circumscribing the perimeter? What makes it stay the same diameter as the pipe that has
No longer exists.
Right. Well, it will only expand so much. So you won't have like a big balloon in an area where you're missing pipe. Now it may be slightly larger. So I think the existing pipe is 30 inches. So it might be slightly larger in diameter than 30 inches, but you're not going to see you know, a full pipe size difference between those areas. You know, it'll expand a little bit more outside of where it's contained, but it won't be so much that it causes issues.
So
Does
you
that help?
wouldn't have to worry if, because if you have a valley in between two sections of pipe, then you would have additional cooling water.
Well, so you're pulling the pipe will be continuous throughout your full length of what's shown on the plans. And so you won't have the issue of the sinkholes because there you won't have the opportunity for water to escape in areas where it previously would have. Now they will, you know, recompact around the areas where there are currently sinkholes. You know, they're not going to leave open voids. So any surface drainage that would have previously caused an issue with the voids will no longer cause a problem because it won't be able to
Right.
move within those voids.
You know, we'll have to go back and make spot repairs where the sinkholes are today, essentially,
Mhm.
after the new pipe is in place.
Yeah, so Charles, there would be support underneath the pipe that is being slip lined if there's a missing section. It wouldn't just be in there in a void where there's
No.
5
Correct.
feet of empty space under.
Correct. Yeah.
Right, and that's what my, is if you have a dip because it expands and it's wider than the either end, then you have an area even, you know, I'm not talking about water escaping, but where it would cool.
Right.
There was a differential.
Mhm. Yes,
Yeah,
they will
it's
compact
okay.
around. Mhm.
Yeah, they'll be able to maintain the
You
grade,
maintain-
go back and they'll have to do probably prepare the sinkholes before you pull the pipe through, and then, you know, to get at the proper elevation, and to have a footing or whatever, the gravel
Mhm.
below it to support the pipe as it comes through.
Yeah, Charles, Emily, I got a question. The slip lining practice, is that a relatively specialized item for contractors, construction contractors, or is it fairly common, meaning that, you know, we're not going to have to go to Fredericksburg or Raleigh wouldn't be bad, but Charlotte or someplace like that in order to find somebody to perform the service, i.e. the cost would go up. It's a fairly common technique.
It is specialized, Alan. You know, you're not every contractor is going to have the equipment to do this, nor the experience.
But that should be reflected in the cost estimate.
it is.
It's higher than what a trenching repair would be. And for that reason, because it's specialized and they need certain equipment.
But slip lining is not something that is, you know, completely new to North Carolina. There are contractors that do it. It's just not your average contractor. But there are, you know, other municipalities use this type of repair for sewer lines and more sanitary sewer. So there would be contractors, hopefully, that are not too distant enough to be able to do it. It's just, you know, your average contractor that does utility does not specialize.
And we
You've
do have
spoken about the durability.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
I was just going to say that we do have people on staff who have experience doing slip lining projects. So within our company, there is expertise in that area. So it won't be like the first time that we've done that.
You've spoken about the durability of the material with the extent of lasting 300 to 500 years with respect to I assume how long would the work be warranted if there were a problem, given the number of areas where pipe is completely destroyed and there will be this going back and forth between existing pipe and no pipe, just to make sure that if there were any problems, how long is a job like this normally warranted for? 1 year. 1 year.
I think that's something that we can address in the front end specifications for the project. Typically, we do a year, but that, that can be up to y'all. So if you want it longer, that would just be something that we would include in the front end documents for the project when it goes to bid. Charles, do you have any?
No, that was
Different.
going to be the same answer I had, Emily. Just we deal with that on the front end on the contract end on what the expectations are when
Mhm.
this project is put out to bid.
I would certainly hate to see a problem at 13 months with this kind of money.
Yeah.
We have typically, on a lot of city projects, is at the about 11-month mark, we go out and do a reinspection of the project to see if there are any issues anywhere, so we can get them addressed before the end of the warranty period. Now, that doesn't mean that at 13 months, something won't show up that, did not, give any indication of an issue at 11 months. But at least we do take an extra step to say, let's just go take a look and see whether or not there's anything obvious that's causing the problem. And something like this, Public Works could go in and even put a camera through and see if they are seeing issues of any failures. Make sure that, that's something that, is holding up from an interior viewpoint, not just above ground.
Yeah, I would run the camera through there as soon as they're done, so we don't have issues down the road. I'd find issues day number 2.
At the end of the project and it's 11 months down the line.
Right.
And you can write it in the contract. The contract provides video so that they don't suspect that our, actual activities caused any of the problems, that they take that on responsibility on themselves.
Okay, any other questions?
But on this thing, it says raised within 5 feet. Is that like the line is here and it's 1 5 feet, this way, 5 feet this way? It's actually 10 feet between.
Within 5 feet, as Charles said at the beginning, it was, we assume, and this is, risky to do, but there was a 6-foot path shown on the old plans from 1883 or whatever. And so if you go 5 feet either direction, so you might have 10 feet between the graves, or since it's within 5 feet, it might be 3 feet on one side, 3 feet on the other. You're trying to say, this one is 2 feet, this one is 5 feet, this one is 3 feet, this one is 4 feet, it just was 5 feet or less. It was kind of lumped together. So there may only be, some of those may be closer than the 10 feet. You're looking at like
30 inch wide, and it's 5 feet.
or less.
It's the same thing this way.
Yes, 5. It says within 5 feet, so it could be 0 to 5 feet. We're hoping it's more closer to 5 foot. Certainly, don't think it's 0 because that would be within 5 foot cell. But
Of course, that's a larger concern if you're using the trenching technique versus the slip lining. Slip lining does not make that much of a difference, depending upon where they have to set up in order to push and pull.
So trenching would be more damaging.
Yes,
right, if you've seen
the
the
open trenching.
in the roadway where you have a crack on one side and the other, and a trench in the middle, and they're digging with the backhoe.
Yeah.
So those tracks might be sitting on top of the graves that you're trying to dig in the middle. And that would be a considerable concern as to whether or not there would be strength to support that piece of equipment, even if you use a small piece of equipment.
Even if you use a small piece of equipment, you gotta have another piece of equipment to put the dirt in.
When we go in and do the grade, don't we put down plywood? Don't we go across grades to do all grades?
Yes, we do.
We use,
We try to
So
avoid
you
it,
could
but
put
sometimes
down
we have.
something to support a small piece of equipment on each side, even the lower grade, the trench.
Yeah, we try to avoid it if we have to.
Yeah, we do. We follow.
does your equipment have the capability of handling a 30-inch pipe or placing into the ditch?
No, I cannot move the 30 inch.
And that's 4 foot 30 foot.
It would be pushing the limit. I mean, with a very small tractor, we could probably do it, but I would not take it back over there. Too much. You're going 16 feet wide, and you're trying to maneuver, and you're trying to get a truck in there to haul the dirt out, or a skid steer, it's turning around, hauling the dirt out. I would consider it. I'd want the smallest you can actually get. You know what I mean? The small skid steer.
What is the size of the current pipe?
Well,
It's 30 inches what we currently have. And go
Yes.
back. How deep? What is the depth?
It varies. You know, it's deeper in some sections. Like at the upstream side, it's a deeper pipe than like when you cross the roadway. Since the roadway is lower than the, area on either side, you don't have much cover at all. So your pipe could be anywhere from 4 to 6, 8 feet deep.
Okay, thank you.
well,
To the
if
bottom
you
of the
look
pipe.
in the, if you look
Not
in
the top.
the catch basins, they're about 4 foot deep.
So
It's not really, they're not.
I mean, it couldn't be, because if it went downhill, it couldn't be lower than that. It wouldn't look like that.
and your roadway, when you're looking down in it, your ground is higher than the road. So that's one of the shallowest locations for the pipe. So you're gonna have more cover, on the side. But no, it's not a deep, and what I'm talking about is not the top of the pipe, it's the bottom of the pipe, the bottom of the bell section, which is larger than the rest of the pipe.
Any more questions? So do we proceed on this recommendation to the full board? See, alternative two.
I think at this point, the recommendation would be to move forward with the design. Whether we want to do construction at this point, but we could complete the design of the project. And then at the completion of the design, they can look at the market again with, construction and see what kind of. Something strange going on up there.
Oh, I do, don't I?
Halloween.
So, we could look at after design, what would the construction be and see whether this is something we want to try to do a budget amendment for this year or add it to the budget.
And I don't have.
Construction next year.
So the design right now is estimated at 13,000.
Well, the design's gonna
That's better.
obviously include some of the other components. You have to do the survey in order to do the design.
Mhm.
And,
Okay.
so you're gonna have to do your subsurface, location. Most of this, would need to be from your 13,000 on your chart down to the 8,000 environmental permit cost. The mortician would be during construction, obviously, and material cost of construction. You're looking at about 37,000 for design of the project. And we do a task order with Lisa Nichols and define that specifically to move forward. If the environmental permit cost is not as much, then that dollar amount would come down.
So 37,000 to design?
Roughly.
So then what is
Right.
the price thing here where it says 13,312?
So the design's going to have to include a survey. You need to include the permits, so you have to do a survey before you can do a design. You have to actually get the location of the pipes, not just
So
off of
we're-
Google Maps, but
Honestly, Mayor, I think if we want to go that route, if that is the choice that the board ultimately makes, we would basically put that onus on Friesen Nichols to tell us what it would cost to get it to the point to where it's prepared to go to bid and then construction. I will also add that this is it's a stormwater project, and we have a stormwater fund, and I think they've already mentioned, I think everybody understands that it's not getting any better. It's not going to get better over time. It's going to continue to get worse, and how getting worse is going to impact what is already there and how much worse the conditions get. May be a factor in the consideration of how to proceed. The city currently has about $980,000 in its stormwater fund. We collect about $42,000 to $44,000 a month for those stormwater fees. So you have the money there. It just depends on if you choose to move forward with this project. We have a couple of other projects potentially pending for stormwater, of which Cherry and Broad is one. That's not going to be inexpensive, but it won't break the bank to the extent that we won't have the funding available to do it. It just depends on where you choose to go and how much of a priority you place on doing this project.
So you'll recommend we'll give it a
So, alternative two. Any comments or questions on that? Okay. They're going to do this too long.
Emily, Charles, we thank you. We appreciate it. We'll be back in touch, but thank you for all your assistance on this project.
You're certainly welcome. We appreciate the opportunity to work with the city on this.
Thank you.
Look forward to it.
Absolutely.
Take care. Have a good afternoon. Good rest of the meeting.
Bye.
You too.
All right, moving on. We're going to talk about City of Rockford review and inspection fees. I'm wrong.
I can, but Amy has assembled a panel of experts who discuss that subject with us today. Amy, I won't even preface it. I'll just turn it right to you. How about that?
Well, I think most of y'all have met Bill Rourke at various meetings in the past. He's with Gill and Associates. He's doing a lot of our work on the utility project. And he brought in Gary Jackson as one of their experts that, can evaluate what's done in other municipalities with respect to, reviewing projects, whether it's your zoning fees, your engineering fees, your inspection fees. What does it take, for a project once they come into Oxford? What types of fees are we looking at? And with the extensive amount of development that's coming up, we have a contract with McGill to kind of put together a developer's packet to help expedite the process and lay down here are the ground rules of what they need to do from A to Z. And one of those first things is what are the fees associated with moving those projects through the city, and looking at when the board adopted the engineering fees. I think it was in 2016 when we went through a lot of the increase in the rates. There were no engineering fees at that point in time. Given the minimal number of developments that we've had in the last 5 years, we wanted to go back and look at, are those fees in line with what other municipalities are, and what is the board's goal with those fees? Is this something that we want to look at the developers bearing the cost for the in-house or external assistance that we need in order to move these projects forward? Does the city want to take on the burden of some of those costs by the hiring of additional staff? Is, how do we want to handle it? Somebody Bill kind of went out and looked at some of the municipalities and what they do, and wanted to give you guys a preview of that and what fees we might need to look at adjusting just to get in line with other municipalities. So I'll let Bill and Gary here.
I'll let Gary take it. He's done the major labor work on this, and you may not brag on himself. He comes from a position of being in local government for his career, so he spent a decade in Nashville as the city manager there. So he's coming from the seat of knowing what he's dealing with when it comes to development. Well, thank you. I want to commend you for looking at this. If you haven't looked at your fees since 2016, I can tell you that across the state, people have been getting busy and updating their fees and schedules. You are one with a lot of other communities that within driving distance, research around it. If you aren't feeling it yet, you will. I guarantee. Just to, I live in North Durham. I should have brought my phone. It took me 30 minutes to get here. So it's coming your way. It's good to do this review. From my experience, even before Asheville, originally moved into a high growth community. There are two things that are absolutely critical on an annual basis. That's to update your capital plan and update your fee schedule. You want to get away from the last thing you want to be doing is jacking up fees and taxes for people that have gotten away from it. So just having a regular review, benchmarking for those things that are generally on your list. If you go to the next slide, the scope of what you look at. We either have fees that community benefit for safety reasons, many reasons, or for the private development. In some cases, it's a grant. So philosophically, this is for the elected officials. When you look at this on an annual basis, you want to ask yourself two questions. One, where are we in terms of surrounding communities and other options for development? So that's a market comparison. The other thing you want to do is definitely consult with the expert staff and directors to know what your costs are. I'm going to get into a couple of items here that will suggest that you revisit what your costs are to deliver the services, particularly in its for the private developments benefit and places additional further with our staff talking to. So with that, starting with the engineering fees, we looked at those through the lens of what's happening. What are they? The fees of Greenville, Henderson, because they're approximate to that. What we felt it was most beneficial to look at Holly Springs, Tupelo, Romeo, Southern Pines. In this particular area, experienced a lot of the same things that we project you will be, forecast you will be experiencing over the next 10 to 20 years. And so those are three communities that are ahead of you. Amy made a good call and suggested, I don't know exactly what your reason was, but it was a good idea to also make sure that I look at the Asheville fees and charges. Asheville has surprisingly some similarities to Oxford, in that it's an old community, cemeteries, water lines, all kinds of infrastructure issues to address. So you have redevelopment issues as well as new development. So Asheville has a blend of greenfield development fees as well as going back in. Maybe you have for uses, not just for infrastructure, but land use plans. And the older you are, the more intense outside the town development interest you get, the more complicated process. You get land use development, you get conditional zoning, and so that's the lens with which I try to look at this.
So we looked at driveways, we looked at sketch plans. That's a unique term in my experience. Those are concepts. Preliminary master, site master plans. But I spent an hour and a half last night reading the so I have a really good grasp of what you're trying to do with that. And I think it's a good term.
I'm impressed that you made it an hour.
Hour and a half. Well, I've read how many of them I've read.
One or two.
And so in terms of familiar, I just immediately connect with it, and instructions were all the same. And by the way, Gil used to do uniform development ordinances. It's a time consuming and labor intensive and community engagement. So I knew what I was doing. That helps. So going down the list, these are all the ones that you're familiar with. Probably the one that I'm not going to talk about is system development. Bill's next slide. What we found were most of those engineering fees were consistent with market. They may be structured somewhat differently. And we didn't provide the table of comparisons we need, so you can have that for reference. I took a lot of notes and captured a lot of information. But you can rest assured that these fees are not exorbitant. We're not charging more than these other communities that have had experience with growth and development. So you're not going to get surprised if we're taking 2 to 3 years by engineers with these fees. They're right in line with the marketplace. If they come in and tell you that they're exorbitant or they can't afford them, Alan, but I probably would have told them where to go. Because development does not decide where to go based upon the fees. It goes based upon the market, potential, the market for housing, the market for retail, the demographics, and the development. A few $100s is not going to make a difference, particularly when you're looking at land costs and construction costs. So that's my take on that. Even if they were a little high, I wouldn't worry about it. We actually are going to lower, but not those. When we get into these 3 areas, the driveway permits is not a big expense. You may say, what's involved here may not be worth increasing it, but we found that your $100 fee is less than the place that we can. And the thing that's missing are those you don't distinguish between residential and non-residential. And if you have commercial development or mixed-use development, you notice those entrances are a little bit more trickier, and you get into this DOT, and you have other issues to be concerned with, right? So giving some consideration to non-residential permits and having those more than residential permits, you don't want to gouge your residents. Splitting, subdividing, developing an adjacent lot. But you're still going to have to go out, review what they plan to do, make sure that it connects properly. So you have some staff. That's not a lot of money. It's not make or break. But if you want to know how you compare, that's a place where you're behind. Okay, inspections and retesting. We didn't recommend changes to the engineering services that are involved with the infrastructure of private development. And I say that we didn't recommend changes out of conflict of interest. We appreciate the opportunity to provide those engineering services and that you're testing and cost on to the developers. I do want to mention that is a best practice. In Fort Worth, Texas, where I was in manager, we outsourced plan review, permits, and these kind of engineering reviews simply because there are peaks and valleys. And when it comes to those costs of infrastructure and review, that's all on the developer. So you should, in my opinion, it's best practice. engaging a professional engineer firm consulting issues. And that's going to be really important to get into this. Because I also worked in a small community, in Liberty, Missouri. We had 2 people on the engineering side. And we use that side for engineers because the growth and development will go like this. The projects will peak and valley. You can't staff those kind of issues. You can, but it's going to cost you more money than if you have competent people managing your consulting engineers.
And if you outsource that, then you need a lot of outsource because there's a lot of demand, you can't handle it, and you don't. And the firm that would be outsourced, if you did that practice, then they have the entire responsibility for the fee and the approval process and everything.
We become the consulting engineers an extension of your management.
Although, we're doing a blend right now, where the city is reviewing some plans solely, some that McGill is reviewing. And one of the things that we have noticed is we have Oxford issues. I mean, Raleigh's and Missouri, there are things that we would like to see that maybe are not explicit in UDO that we might want to make sure, what type of trees, sweet gum tree, maybe we share one, maybe not planting this. I don't know that anybody likes a sweet gum tree. Seems to be, something that everybody breaks their ankle on, but it's expected by the developers frequently. And they don't care about changing it, it's no big deal. But catching things like that, or where we want to replace the fire hydrants, what Parks and Rec is looking for. So there's some things that even when we outsource, the plan review, that the city is reviewing to make sure that something is not a surprise that maybe come in Asheville, but it's just not the way we do business here. So, definitely getting the technical expertise plugging into a water model. Is there enough, did they put the right size water lines in their new development? Sewer capacity, are they trying to put everything in an 8-inch line and they really should have a 12-inch? Technical wise, outsourcing. But to your comment about everything is outsourced, I think there's still a need for police, fire, Parks and Rec to provide input to make sure that we are getting what we want. And we have noticed some things that they are, Bill has made comments and sent them back that are 100% correct according to our UDO, and I'll look at it and say, we need to change that in UDO. Because this is not what we want to see out there. It was just not noticed when it went through and was passed initially. With the growing pains that we are having, that's going to happen, whether it's in our specs, our details, our UDO. It's an evolving living document as we find out what works and what doesn't.
Answer your question. It's a delegation. It's not an application.
Got it.
So, when it comes to inspections and retesting, Bill, do you want to comment on this? This is typically not a time-consuming, expensive process. We think you might want to consider going to 8 days of retesting because it's the line charges. And so I think this is one we would go down and simplify the process instead of making it totally.
Yeah, the initial inspection fees are currently priced at whether matching space. It accommodates the scale of the project. A smaller project pays less than a larger project. But typically when it gets to testing, you're testing along the segment. And so charging for that whole footage again doesn't make a lot of sense, even if it's reduced. At that point, if you're testing a water line, you're going to come back out and make sure the line's charged, come back, check it. So it's quantifiable. You're not out there for a long period of time. Typically, you're going through the retesting. So that's what I'm saying. It probably makes sense to do a fee for every time they call to come out and have you retest it. So I will say that I've had some where it's so bad we made them dig up every single joint in a section of water line because it was leaking so bad. So there are always exceptions to the rule, but that's also, if you're gonna mess it up, we're gonna, every time we come back out, there's gonna be a fixed fee charge for bringing back out.
And we did, may have suggest this, since if you review the plan in-house, you would do this. But if you outsource the engineering, that makes sense. Okay. Don't get into it here, but one of the things that is also comparable with other communities is that this is from fast growing communities where some of them don't work shoddy. You get into the need to have escalating inspection fees. So keep that in mind down the road. So if you're going back to re-inspect a second or third time, those fees need to be, if it's $400, first re-inspection will be $800, the second will be $1,200. It's 5% of the people are going to be 95% of the problem. And then it will grow. That's just something that I'm not recommending it now, but keep that in your cap for the future, particularly for public works staff. I've seen that happen a lot. System development is probably the most important comment we will make today.
Yeah, and that's the system development fees. That's the fee that the developer pays for each of the houses that you're going to bring into the development, so that you can make sure that your system stays solid. In all of our analysis, Oxford's on the lower end of the scale on the system development fees that are being charged right now. But that's not something we can just say, okay, you need to double that fee. There's legislation in place that was passed 2 years ago, I believe now, that actually defines how you set the system development fees. And it cannot be arbitrary. It has to be based on your system needs, and one of the backbones of that is an up-to-date capital improvement plan, so that you're actually looking at what it's going to cost to maintain and operate your system. And I think, for those that remember Maslow's triangle, I think Oxford's been down here on this, I need food, shelter, water, and you didn't get up to I want vacation. And now we're moving from that existence and CIP that was making sure that you're healthy. Now you need to look at, what do I need to do to be healthy and grow strong? So you're moving up that triangle. So I think the city's put in an application for some asset inventory assessment grants. Should find out in January, February timeframe that money came through. And part of those projects would be taking a fresh look at all the infrastructure and doing a new CIP. So I think the system development fees definitely need to go up, but you can't do it without first doing the homework. So that's not something you come in today after a few weeks of looking at this. That's a much lengthier process. So that's months in the work to get to the point where you can substantiate. Because if you were to just say we're going to double it, then you can be contested by a developer that says, your fees are out of line, prove to me, and then we just go down a path and it's not going to change. So that's probably our biggest suggestion on increases is in the system development fees. Have to do the homework first to be able to make a recommendation of what that means.
And, to put it another way, like with our current CIP, and I know that the first time we rolled that out, it was, part of the first AIA and skeleton AIA that we did from the very beginning. And we looked at that first $100 million and, had to do ourselves up on the floor because it was such a shocking number. Is all of that is just to maintain what we have. That's not, there is very little in that CIP that deals with expansion. And if we want to build a backbone for, developers to put a water transmission line out to the outer loop in areas that it doesn't have it, or a sewer outfall line, which would then allow the developers to put in all the infrastructure within their development. Those are items that aren't in our CIP currently. And that is where some of this development fee could, you know, if we are planning for putting in that backbone, and we are planning to do that in there, one expansion, if you would like to call that, is the wastewater treatment plant. And the Car Lake that we're doing. But that's, you know, the very beginning of getting the water to us and the very end of accepting the wastewater, but it has nothing to do with the pipes in the middle. So those pipes in the middle, if we want to look at more growth, we need to look at, do we want to put into that backwards? And that's not a decision that, you know, I think engineering needs to make. It's where the board wants to go. And this is part of our meeting tomorrow night. How do we want development to move forward? How proactive do we want to be? How quickly do we want it to happen? And so the system development fees tie back to our ability to do some of those things and looking at the future and where we want to go. You know, y'all are familiar with Rev Tellis did our last study. It just like the CIP, it needs to be revisited, readopted, and updated. The AIA is our third, what becomes skeleton one, because everything changes, and we've changed so significantly since we started this process, you know, in 2016. Those of y'all that were around when we first got started. So, you know, certainly something we want to look at moving forward, and you know, we'll start the discussions, I think, tomorrow night with how we want to do it, where we want to go, how proactive, how methodical, and so on. So, you know, we can certainly, once we get a new CIP, we'll get the AIA grants this round and be able to follow this new recommendations to that study.
We want to be sitting here years from now, and have a look at this. There's significant steps as Bill's outlined, that need to take place in order to walk with them. Because you can't, there's no country rig for this. There's a lot of legal exposure and litigation in this area. You try to cut corners of the thing. So in similar fashion, we looked at the planning and zoning fees. And these are some very broad categories. If you go to the table that we prepared with the benchmark communities, they all have very different development ordinances and structures, and you will find different terminology and different ways to establish many of these. And of course, Board of Adjustment and sign fees. You let these down at the bottom. Pretty standard stock and trade, but when it comes to permits, the way that they differentiate between residential and non-residential, in particular areas, zoning requests, the conditional zoning, historic district zoning, every community is very different. We did the best we could to find similarities in those fees with yours. And what we found was that and this is inclusive of the counties adjacent here and adjacent. Permits, residential and non-residential, are all in the same range. Most of this is tradesmen, and so it's built on what's the cost for electrical work and plumbing work. And, you have basic charges for permits that you're trying to recover your cost, you're trying to make it possible for non-pot to move additions and renovations, as well as using things. And we found that those fees were pretty comparable across the board, and that's true because I think that there are a lot of professionals in the building inspection business, for national standards as well as state peer-reviewed comparisons that keep those pretty comparable. It doesn't happen accidentally. Board of Adjustments the same way. Typically, the fees are $400 or $500. Appeals are similar years as well. Sign fees. I really like your sign fees. based on the cost of the sign, and they are progressing with the complexity of what you review. A lot of places just sign is a sign, fee is a fee. Believe me, if you don't have your sign permitting and inspection process together, you will pay a heavy price. I'm impressed with the structure of that place. So we don't recommend any changes to that. Home occupation, everybody seems to have the same effort to make that, to regulate that, and make it a novel. Where do we see opportunities? First of all, in terms of zoning requests, yours seem to be on the low end of the spectrum. We think that the $500 fee should go to $1,000, and similarly, ordinance changes are good for the increase as well. I give that serious consideration. That's one of those things that I maybe you haven't revisited it since 2016. The inflation alone will just plan unit development. I have to admit to not knowing the extent to which that comes into play here. But Holly Springs has a much higher base fee, and they also have the acreage fee. If you haven't had a lot of plan unit developments, they can get very high.
Got two per.
Yeah, they're a pain in the. I'm gonna watch myself do.
You're one three.
I'll tell you what, if you don't have that, you're gonna be losing money every time. You're losing money back. So I highly recommend that you have a per acre fee, even if you don't change the flat base. It looks like you very easily point to a benchmark and say, well, this is what Holly Springs has in place, and they did experience that. Temporary and special event fees. I think in our letter we said your population growth is coming and you're going to see a lot more special event requests. But I would also say that with the reopening of communities post-pandemic, you're going to see a lot more events and public activities. There are a lot of things that you can co-sponsor. Asheville co-sponsored any event you can imagine. It's a circus 24/7, 365 days a year. You can go as a tourist to Asheville any day of the week, in the spring to the fall, and even most of the winter time. And there's something going on. And I got to tell you, these are a major burden. And the Public Works Department is requiring these. So we highly suggest that you make this a point to review. We don't have specific recommendations of what to do. I think you just have a flat fee for your special events review. And that's, you need to give some thought and some language to this. It's time to review those. We found that in the absence of fees, the other thing you experience, most of this is a financial conversation and cost recovery, but you also have regulatory law. If you don't have fees and permitting for special events, anything you can do, I remember the manager of Liberty Resort travel 25,000. Missouri, I went to Kansas City. I got a call one day, and it was literally like a state fair and a shopping center that had just been put up overnight. They had no permits and no fees. And they were drawing droves of people. And we learned very quickly, we need to know what so, they were serving food, they hadn't got a county permit. This kind of thing happens on a regular basis. If it wasn't private property owners doing stuff, it was nonprofits staging all intention to raise money. But you have public safety issues. It'd be like having other neighbors on every corner of the street. You just can't have unregulated things. So this is a matter of regulation. This isn't a development. But I've got more bruises, especially these. I speak from bad experience. If you look at the escrow fees, they're pretty well done. And if you get into looking at your parking recreation fees, they're just getting that as well. There's partnership fees, there's fees of land, and then police and fire, EMS are called. We need to anticipate them. They would be part of the review process as well. So the permit triggers their eyes on it. You want to, as a manager and staff, instill a culture of cooperation and openness to this. But at the same time, you have to have guidelines and expectations for how these things are. So with that, this answer any questions you may have about that as well.
And the notice that you're taking the notes, we can send this PowerPoint presentation to y'all, so you would have that. And Bill was just going to throw it real quick to show you kind of here is the, and I compiled this in a nice neat PowerPoint presentation with the data that goes with it, you know, covering multiple municipalities. And as Gary said, that, you know, some of these fees aren't, you know, identical in the way that they are charged, whether it's for a lot instead of a per acre fee, but they've done their best to kind of pull that back together and, you know, relate it to our fees as best as they can. Say, okay, this is something that, you know, we can look at and review here in Oxford. So, you know, it's not something that y'all need to get any pretty about, but just to know that we have actually gone, you know, those more extensively. Since I asked for it, there's no one to wait. I've got it on the flash drive somewhere.
And you say that we were talking more about this tomorrow night.
Well, you know, I think when you talk to the planning board, you know, in terms of like the CIP, you know, and what you would want to put on that, if you want to be developer friendly, you know, where the board and the planning board wants to go with, you know, how wide are we opening our arms? Are we letting them, you know, the developers come in and dictate to us, or are we, you know, telling them how we want this to progress and where we want it to go in? And so, you know, I think some of those things are, where is the planning board and board of commissioners at, you know? And do we want to, you know, item D on our agenda, the Division of Water Infrastructure is anticipating $1 billion, B with a B as in boy, $1 billion, you know, potentially in the spring round, depending on how politics work out. And, you know, what
They ever put a budget.
So there's, you know, going to be some money available that would not normally be there. And do we want to take advantage of it to put in some of these outfalls and transmission lines and get a bigger look, you know, a bigger infrastructure base, you know, for developers to tie to? But that's going to tie back to what kind of debt can we take on? Do we have system development fees that will support doing some of these projects and moving forward? So, you know, we aren't going to be applying for anything, you know, until April 30th of next year. And something I want the board to start thinking about is, you know, if the funds are there, is that something that we would, you know, the board wants us to try to get funding for? Typically, we have gone for replace Lakeland Light, fix, as Bill said, we're on the bottom level. We just want to sustain what we have and make sure we continue good service to our existing customers. If we want to go for vacation time and go for expansion, what are we doing to actually be able to, you know, help them move forward? So Bill's found, you know, just, you know, the different communities
This
that they.
is a spreadsheet here put together. And
Will send this to us, correct?
yeah, so this has, it is a lot. So it's all those benchmark communities along with Oxford. And we did this for the planning and zoning, and then we did also for the engineering. So
we tried to distill all this down into that PowerPoint presentation to not overwhelm you with stacks and stacks of numbers, but you know, this is,
So these are all the fee comparisons?
yes.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we were, you know, we were gonna give you the PowerPoint where we kind of distilled it down, but just wanted you to know that we didn't just pull those numbers out of thin air. They did an extensive check and background on, you know,
I
recommendations.
think everybody gathers the fact that what we're trying to do is not have the city's fund balance coffers through these fees. What we're trying to do is hold our citizens harmless, essentially, in not having them to pay the cost of developers coming in and needing all of the time with our staff, all of the resources, all of the attention. The fees that they pay should cover that. That is really the intent behind looking at this, to see if we are where we should be or are going where we need to go. And in some places we are not. And that's a byproduct of what they described previously. That we have had very little to slow growth for decades. Now it is on our doorstep. And all of this is growing pains, like we've been talking about for the last couple of years. And it's not new to the developers. It is new to us. And you know darn good and well that there's a reason why the developers are here. They're here because there is an opportunity. An opportunity represents money for them. And we just want to make sure that it's not costing money to the city and the city's taxpaying residents. That's the real initiative behind this. It is not an effort to make money or have the city's coffers in any way, shape, or form. We just make sure that our citizens don't pay the bill, and that in turn, when the developer submits these plans and their inspections and all these things that are required, that they're also being done in a timely fashion. That the developer expects, as well as a certain level of professionalism that is being performed during those inspections and reviews, that not only the developer gets what they want because time is money for them, but the city gets what it wants and needs to make sure that the product that is produced is of the highest quality possible. That they're meeting all the plans and specifications and the engineering design that is there. Because if you'd like to come up to my office, or if you'd like to go to Amy's office and you pull out one of these plans, let you see the level of detail in it. All of that has to be made sure to make it absolutely correct. Because you mess that up, you've got what has been prescribed before. As going back in and having to replace water lines. It's a nightmare. So you need to do everything that you can do to try to get it right on the front end. And with that front end comes cost, comes expectations, and it shouldn't come free. So that's just the bottom line in all of it. So
In many respects, this doesn't seem all that different from the discussion that we had in the summer of 2016 about setting sustainable water rates so that we can apply for Connect NC funds. That you want to create a system that is self-sustaining, so that it can, you know, as the work comes in, we have the capacity, and as you say, in the end, it's to create a better system for the developer because it will give us the capacity to handle what's coming in and turn it around in a timely fashion to them.
And we want to make sure that what is built, you know, is to our standards. What, you know, it starts with design and goes through construction. Because if I give Steve a new development and the roads fail in 5 years because it wasn't designed or installed correctly, then that costs the city millions of dollars to fix roads, water, sewer. You know, instead of our utilities lasting 40, 60, you know, 80 years, we might be fixing them in 5, 10, 15. And it's a huge investment that the developers are asking us to pay. They get to design it, build it, and walk away. And they're going to do it the most economical, cheapest way they can get it in order to make the most money. You know, and we want the city to have a system that, we don't have to worry about. And, from design to, completion. As Alan said, we need this to be self-sustaining, just like fees, so that we aren't losing our shirt and that responsibility back on the existing residents, businesses, say it's your responsibility to pay for the new.
You said we will be practical.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, what else do we need to talk about this?
I think right now we've discussed it enough. We really wanted to plant that seed in your minds and get your reaction, whatever that may be, to that conversation about fees and to get you to hopefully understand where we are coming from, what we are doing when we propose something like this as far as a look back at our fees. Nobody wants to pay more, but the developers are getting something out of this. The city hopes to in the long run, and the investment on the front end is critical. Or you're going to pay dearly on the back end of it. And we're starting to see some of that now. Some of the developments that came earlier with the condition of the roads and some of those other things that we're dealing with. Not saying that anything was done inappropriately, but you want to do everything that you can on that front end to make sure you're getting the highest quality product that you can possibly get.
And we may make a recommendation for the board at the December meeting for some of those fees that they indicated there were some changes recommended. And so we'll distill that down, this was letting everything that they did look at, and those few items that they did recommend changes, we'd like to send that into the December board.
For what it's worth, retired city manager, I concur with the entirely. I would add that to the comment I made earlier, this is a valuable process. Valuable process for you to review these fees and charges, because it's not just a financial thing, it's a regulatory thing, it's a quality, community thing. And whether you raise a single fee or not, having gone through this, be knowledgeable of where your fees are in the marketplace for your position. The developers come in, and voters come in, and complain to the mayor, to the city manager, council members about, I can't do business in your town. This is just way too expensive. There's just more rules than any other group ever. You can say, well, we put up the speed on what our fees are. We've done it. Where have you been looking and successful, and what have they changed? Or should we be looking at? Should we be looking at, well, where have you been looking at? This is empowering. It's a smart thing to do. It's very timely. And that's why I encourage you to do your capital plan update to the future, develop the infrastructure, and know where you are in the marketplace. Not just for non-profit here, but I know it's political as well as the policy decision, but putting the effort into this will pay you dividends in your own community.
Okay, we certainly appreciate your time and effort on this one for today. Amy, anything else on this?
I think that covers this for the moment. We can move on to the next two items, which are really brief. So I know we're pushing our time here, but one of the things that we have talked about with the downtown master plan, and the look that we want to do, and achieve our new crosswalks and roundabout and medians we are putting in is we are looking at, the mayor was there when at Wall Street, we did the great appearance for a crosswalk. And so what I did is asked our intern last summer to go through and identify areas in downtown where we are putting crosswalks in with all the resurfacing work that's coming in. This isn't a decision that's actually going to be made, immediately, but it was shown Wall Street, those that aren't familiar with it. We want to give crosswalks just not that typical solid white or white stripes, that's the high visibility. is, going ahead and providing a little bit more aesthetically pleasing and, it's in the shade, but the by Wall Street, here you can see it looks like brick, it's colored, it's, something different than just, your ordinary crosswalk. Is at the roundabout, having a white stripe on either side of this, and then in the middle, we have the crosswalk look of brick. And so, we identified the locations in the downtown area, reached out to the company that did this work previously, and put together a map that actually said, okay, if we want to achieve this look in the majority of the downtown area, these are the locations that we can, move forward with doing crosswalks. And you may have actually noticed DOT is out putting in a lot of handicap ramps in the downtown area and moving forward with some of these things. And I expect that you can read this, but we can also make this map available that shows, okay, we picked out all these locations and where we put the crosswalks and how they are existing currently. And then we looked at the pricing of those particular locations and found out that if we wanted to do all the crosswalks that are on here, which is the municipal service area, it would cost us somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000. So, we have a spreadsheet that did some estimated numbers that said, okay, our average cost, is about $4,100 per crosswalk. And so if we want to achieve a little bit more aesthetically pleasing downtown look, this is the cost that we're going to be, needing to keep in mind.
So $250,000 to do all of the crosswalks at about $4,100 per crosswalk.
In the municipal service area. So, and that are shown on that map. And, if we identify more locations that, we want additional crosswalks, maybe we only put them on 2 sides because that's where they exist currently. If you want them on all 4 sides, then you would say it's probably average $4,100 more. Obviously, the wider the road section of the crosswalk, the higher the cost, the more narrow, lower cost. So, we looked at and made an estimated cost. As you do more crosswalks, it's like the Costco buying effect, it gets cheaper the more you do. So we estimated that we would do at least a minimum of an 8,000 square foot area. And that's when the price point drops to about $10, $10.50 per square foot. And so, we have a spreadsheet, and I'm sure I'll be able to read all of this, but it says that, Wall Street and, Wall Street and Spring Street and, Hillsborough Street, here would be the cost at that particular intersection. We will need to determine, how much money we want to spend out of Powellville to achieve this look. And if we want this to, be part of the resurfacing package or be done at the same time the resurfacing is done next spring or next summer, we need to be able to hand this to DOT ahead of time. And, so we've got, maybe 6 months that we, can look at this. I would say it would be safer for about 4. But this is going to go out, and look at, okay, at Main Street in Williamsboro, we want all of these. So that's this amount of dollars. And if we're willing to spend, $140,000, which, 17 people are coming to work out to. So, we need to look at, particular crosswalks, what it will cost, where that we want them located, and is this something we want to move forward with? Because if we're spending money on the crosswalks, then we're not spending money on the research. So, it's a decision that needs to be made as to where we want to spend our dollars, how much we want to spend, and, get that together sometime in the spring so we can make sure DOT has it by the time we get around the summer. So it's not a decision that we need to make today. I just want to put it on everybody's radar that this is something that we are going to need to make a decision for, in the next few months.
So DOT would need to know about it because they would need to know to put this in the parallel white striping rather than high visibility crosswalk. Correct. Okay. So it's more of a, give them sufficient time just to know not to add in more, but this sidewalk, look at the precision sidewalk. Anyway, they would be the ones paid away or
There's
paid
several.
away. There's a
There's
number.
several of them that do that.
So, you know, and there's just different options as to what kind of look you can put in, you know, if it's not going to be a brick look, if we decide to go with a standard, you know, DOT striping, you know, we can look at those as well, and, you know, whether they're diagonal or solid, you know, parallel, you know, we can look at those, but we would typically go with a white line on either side with brick look in the middle. That, you know, we chose to go that way.
And that, I mean, I remember that company that did that had lots of options. And we could do a custom design thing.
If you want to paint hot sauce, you know, or hot, you know,
Okay,
peppers
put
on
the peppers in
the
there.
asphalt, you
Yeah.
know, so, this is, you know, kind of with their standard pattern, so want to get that on everybody's radar, no decision to be made on that now. And the same thing with, item D that was on the agenda, and we touched on briefly, is to keep in mind that there is a significant amount of money that is going to be available potentially in the spring round. And if we want to go for that, then some of the things that we've done in the past, you know, readopting, you know, our asset management plan or making sure our CIP is up to date, because your project needs to be in CIP if it's going to be something we're going to money. You know, any of those things that we can do to get the additional points so that we can get that funding. Because if we put the responsibility back on the developer to do something like was done for Oxford Park subdivision, where the outfall was extended to the subdivision, if they're borrowing from a bank or we're borrowing from a bank with them to do a project like that, probably we're not going to get the same type of interest rates that we would with the funding DWI. And so is it something that we want to do those type of projects, and then we add an assessment to anybody that ties to those lines until that line is paid for? So we're putting it in ahead of time and then saying, okay, Mr. Developer, if you want to connect to it, this will carry 1 million gallons and you want 200,000, so you pay 20% of the cost of this, you know, line that went in. So these are things that we need to look at between now and probably March, you know, because we want to be able to put the application package together. So these are things I want y'all to, you know, kind of keep in mind, and we do need some decisions moving forward, but not today.
More growing pains, more getting ducks in a row.
To go along with that, though, at some point, we have a discussion. We can talk all we want about all the things we want, but at some point, the LGC is going to say you're exhausted about doing and passing. So should there be some
There needs to be.
kind of conversation
That's
about
part of
this is
the
what we
equation, is understanding what you can afford. So that's a, as far as I'm concerned, that's it. And we'll talk a little bit about the crosswalks. Crosswalks, we all understand what we have done to this point. The city receives what it receives in Calvert funding to the research. We've committed to the next 10 years, or either 1.25 million, basically, make those payments for the next 10 years. So what I'm getting at is the Cal Bill fund, while it has restrictions as to what you can spend it on, we're committed. We use the Cal Bill fund to not only pay for resurfacing with sidewalks and pay for a few other things, not like what we used to. You know, there are commitments there. So usually you start getting into how much you're receiving, and we're burning it down pretty good. $750,000 that we get for us. Whatever's going to be, how the bid comes in, about $1.5 million of additional resurfacing work coming up this summer. Crosswalks on top of that. We've got to be very careful with looking at it from the perspective of what is our commitment for how long. Because we're going to continue to have resurfacing needs of other streets coming along, even after this large project is coming summer.
And, you know, some of y'all might be familiar with when we put, this up before, some of those crosswalks when McGill was designing the downtown on Main Street, bulbouts there. Some of these are the crosswalks that we're referring to and what we want to do there. So, Alan had an excellent point is, our resurfacing project coming up has taken a significant amount of money from the Powell bill funding, and is this something, that we want to devote money to, that, to come from another budget somewhere else? I don't know, that would be something that Alan might be better ideas we can take out of the general fund, instead of the Powell bill fund, if that requires, something, or is this something the downtown DOEC wants to try to fund some of these to add a different look downtown? One thing that wasn't on the agenda, switching gears real quick for a moment, is our water tanks. I know this is a conversation Alan and Steve and I have had a number of times, as we are looking at changing the company that currently oversees some of the work for the water tanks, but the clause that's currently in our agreement with them requires that the recommendation be made by a voting member of the board if we want to change who we have a maintenance contract with. And so that's something that I think we need to take that responsibility back from, the board level and keep that on a staff level where the city manager and, Steve, which is really where the tank contracts or, maintenance ends up. That's something that they can look at and negotiate and do at their level rather than it needing to go to the board. But the board will have to recommend if we want to actually sever that contract with the existing vendor. And it's something that, based on some exploration, appears to be favorable to looking at other companies.
Potentially, I will say this, that Alan ain't quite there yet, so that's a continuing conversation among staff. Before we adjourn, we'll give our elected officials that are here present, those who you just take them with you. I've been having, as you know, some conversation with some folks at the DOT Division 5 office about putting in some, what we would like to see of a nice big brown historic welcome to Oxford signs. For a number of reasons that I won't get into here now, that's not quite possible at the moment. We may have to play the political game to get that accomplished. But what we are eligible to do is put in welcome to signs on 85 and potentially other entrances into the city of Oxford. And this is the DOT standard practice to do so. There's some examples in there, so take it. We'll have another conversation about it. It's food for thought right now because I know it's going to bring up a lot of additional questions and ideas about how they can look and what they can say and all those kinds of things. But I wanted to get it into your hands this afternoon because I've been having that conversation for the past month or so with the DOT Division 5 engineer. That's kind of where we are at this point in time, and it'll be a topic for another day.
Okay, one other quick comment. I failed to mention that Cheryl Hart, our planning director, has joined us for the record. Have that on there. A lot of good work, a lot of good effort